Welcome to the Wildr Wellness Podcast, Sarah. It is so nice to have you here. And this is, I have to confess, this is my first podcast back in a while. So really lovely to be talking to someone familiar, someone friendly. But for anybody who doesn't know Sarah, she's a registered nurse and holistic health practitioner. So working in the kind of functional space and has been doing this for sort of 8 to 10 years now. So really experienced practitioner with a lot of incredible knowledge. Mostly going to be diving into gut health and the microbiome, but yeah, great to have you here, Sarah. So thank you very much for your time.
Thank you for being here. It was a joy to see your email to check in and see whether we talked about doing a gut health podcast in our last one that we did together. Stoked to be here, and I off the gut, so I'm stoked.
Awesome. Yeah. For anybody who hasn't listened to the last episode, we did it on looking and sort of diving a little deeper into what you can discover through blood testing, like pretty standard blood testing that you can do through the GP. But now that we're talking about the gut health, it's kind of, for us who work in the kind of functional space, it really is all about the gut in terms of no matter what somebody's experiencing in terms of health issues and symptoms, we always end up doing some type of gut work. But before we get too deep, let's start by running through a little bit of info for people on how the digestive system actually works, and then maybe actually explain the kind of gut microbiome, what that actually is.
So I think just from a very simplistic general rundown, how I describe it to people when I'm working with clients is mainly understanding it kind of like plumbing. So for a lot of people, we experience a gut issue generally maybe with our bowels or bloating. So we might have loose stools or be constipated or have distension in our tummy. But I always like to think it actually starts from the top down. So you always want to start from the top, firstly thinking about your oral microbiome, and then am I chewing my food first and foremost? Because if we don't chew our food, it's going to affect our stomach. So pretty much you eat your food, hopefully chew it till it's a nice mush, and then it goes into your stomach. Your stomach holds all of your hydrochloric acid, so acid which then tends to break down foods, and enzymes which also help with the breakdown of foods. From there, you then have a little kind of gap that goes into your small intestine. In your small intestine are millions and trillions of bacteria, which we have kind of all through our digestive tract, but they change in diversity and kind of intensity of how many you have in different strains, whether it's in your stomach, your small intestine, or in your large intestine. Small intestine breaks down the food nice into a little mush, hopefully that's kind of already been done, absorbs nutrients, feeds bacteria, those bacteria go and do their job, and then it moves through to you also, your pancreas is involved and gallbladder to break foods down properly, and then it goes into your large intestine, and then that's what you poo out ultimately. In terms of microbiome in general, I think it's becoming much more of a talked about thing, which is amazing because, as you mentioned, the microbiome, in my opinion and lots of people's opinion, is the home to most dysfunction in health, really, metabolic kind of dysfunction. A lot of it is driven from the gut. So your microbiome is really, we're just made up of millions and trillions of bacteria, and we're more bacteria than we are cells. And so the most important thing from a sort of simplistic perspective is to make sure that the bacteria that we have the right forms of them, and there's lots of diversity of them, and we're feeding them the right foods. So we're living in an environment that supports them, we're feeding foods that help them grow, and continuing to foster how much the work that they do, because most of how we experience life is actually what our microbes are doing.
Yeah, cool. Great. Thank you for the overview. I think it's nice that you started with the mouth. It is really important to understand that the digestive system and our ability to break down food really starts with chewing and the mouth, saliva, and all the things that go in there. It's not just the kind of small and large intestine bit. But obviously, as you say, when it comes to the microbiome, the small and the large intestine are where most of our bacteria kind of lie, and really predominantly being in the large. So let's dive into what is the, you mentioned feeding the microbiome, feeding the right types of bacteria, the right types of food. Where would you start with some high level guidelines around what types of food to feed the good bacteria? Let's just dive straight into there.
Yeah, in terms of high level, the most important thing is diversity of food we eat, because we're very habitual creatures. We tend to eat the same thing, breakfast, lunch, and dinner, relatively, with the odd thing that changes, which means you're technically only really feeding a very small form of bacteria that are in your gut. So you really want to try and expose yourself. I always get clients to eat not the same breakfast every day, like change. I might do a smoothie one day and then eggs the next day and then chia puddings the next day, and vice, kind of moving through that. But lots of different forms of food. I mean, the most predominant feeder of bacteria is sort of complex carbohydrates, polyphenols, so root vegetables, leafy greens, all the different colors of your vegetables, and like abundantly eat them, not just small amounts. Like you want to have at least a plate, half of your plate to be full of some form of fiber, ultimately, that then feeds the plants. Feeds the bacteria. Also, in terms of like prebiotics and probiotics, prebiotic foods like onion and garlic, leeks, all those sorts of things have components to them that help feed bacteria. And then also we can get probiotic foods, which are foods that have been fermented over a period of time, things like kimchi, sauerkraut, kefir. Those things are also really good to incorporate into your diet. I guess because we're both working in a space that people come with issues, so a lot of people I see can't tolerate prebiotic foods. Like they'll find it really difficult to have onion and garlic. It might make them bloated, or they find fermented foods challenging too. But really what that's telling us, if you can't tolerate those foods, is that there's disruption in your microbes internally inside you. So I'm definitely a big advocate for, like, lots of people like, oh, I've done FODMAP. I'm like, my biggest thing is like, FODMAP is helpful for a period of time to remove the food, but it never fixes the problem. Like if you take the food out, but you don't fix the problem of why that food is feeding bacteria, you're always going to have to avoid onion and garlic, and they're literally like the keystone to making food good. So the work that I really do is being like, okay, if I'm struggling with prebiotic foods or probiotic foods, where's the issue in my gut? And that's when we go in and kind of do the work in terms of getting rid of the bad guys that are feeding off those foods.
Cool. Yeah, that's a great little overview. The one thing I pulled out of there that I might even need to take notice of is the same breakfast every day. If anybody knows me or follows me on Instagram, I literally have the same breakfast every day. Although I change the fermented foods. So sometimes it's a sauerkraut, like a traditional cabbage sauerkraut. Sometimes it's a beetroot sauerkraut. Sometimes it's parsley. Like sometimes they're microgreens. Small changes, but it is really egg-based because I just find that starts me off well. So maybe need to bring a little variety into my breakfast. But maybe if I have enough variety in lunch and dinner, then it's okay.
Yeah, and if you also just add variety in terms of veggies that you're having with your eggs,
yeah,
which is, if you're already doing that with fermented foods, a little bit on the side, that's perfect.
Yeah, cool. All right, we're next going to dive into kind of, I suppose what would be the really classic gut symptomology that people might be dealing with. These are the sorts of things that should be fairly obvious that's related to the gut because it's gut symptomology. But then what else could people be dealing with in terms of health issues, especially within the kind of chronic health issues, things that happen over a long period of time that may actually be related to gut health, even though it doesn't seem obviously so.
Yeah, I think the most sort of prominent thing that we see tends to be people coming with loose stools, so they'll be having constant diarrhea, urgency, or the opposite. So they'll really struggle to poo. They'll have constipation, want poo, every 2 days or more than that. I mean, even, you should be pooing 2 to 3 times a day. If you eat 2 to 3 times a day, you should be pooing 2 to 3 times a day. And most people are gobsmacked when I tell them. They're like, oh, I poo once a day, every morning at 8 a.m. It's regular. I'm like, that's too slow. So yeah, most obvious things: constipation, diarrhea, and then bloating, distension, gas, feeling nauseous. I get quite a lot of people with nausea, with difficulty with foods, fatty foods tends to be the most obvious gut stuff. Then we'll kind of link, I'll sort of link into autoimmune disease, because I see a lot of that in practice. You might present with rheumatoid arthritis or Hashimoto's disease, but the essence, in my opinion, the root of where that comes from is gut dysfunction. So there's permeability of the gut wall that drives inflammation, and then we have this chronic inflammatory response, which then drives this chronic, ultimately your immune system attacking itself. So not that many people are that aware of the link of, like, if I'm experiencing an autoimmune disease, or to be honest, any dysfunction in your body, like skin conditions, eczema, psoriasis, acne, it's like external manifestations of internal dysfunction. So yeah, from a disease state, definitely driven from the gut. Like, I just haven't ever worked with someone that I haven't done gut work. Like, that's just what you do. Well, I do anyway. The other thing that I'm really interested in at the moment, have been doing a lot more sort of research and looking into, is the connection between our mental well-being and how our gut functions. I recently was doing a webinar on psychobiotics, so understanding the importance of the strains of bacteria that we have in our gut and the impact it has on, like neurodevelopment processes. Like, it's wild. When you're born, we have quite a limited flora within our gut, because we're only being breastfed, so there's not a huge diversity of the foods that we're getting, but it's also like hugely correlated with brain development. So there's actually really cool research that I was listening to a podcast recently on the synergistic kind of relationship between our gut and our brain, and we know they're interlinked. Like, what happens in our gut affects our brain, what happens in our brain affects our gut. And from my perspective in clinic, every single client that I see that's on an antidepressant medication will do a stool test, and every single time they're deficient in specific forms of bacteria that help with the production of neurotransmitters. So I think, like, and it's just amazing seeing people. And I had a client yesterday, and I asked her if she was happy that I shared her kind of story on the podcast. But she has a long history of addiction to alcohol, and a general addictive behavior, really, in terms of smoking and just seeking dopamine hits. Like, we were talking yesterday, she's doing amazingly well, and I was like, just make sure, I just want you to do a 15-minute walk every day. And then she's like, oh, I'm doing an hour walk every day. And I was like, classic. It's like this constant, like, must do more, or always on. And so we've been talking about that a lot, and how the need for dopamine or serotonin or GABA or BDNF, it's all there. And 50% of those hormones are made from your gut bacteria. So if we don't have the bacteria in our gut, we cannot expect to feel those emotions, or just like feeling like we're satisfied in our life, in those areas, if we've got no beneficial flora in our gut. And it blows me away every single time. The most complex clients that I see that have challenging neurochemistry, so experiences with I've had a few with sort of just challenging kind of things they're experiencing, and on multiple medications. The work that we've been doing is just mind-blowing for me, and for them have been like, whoa. Like, I'm working with a client at the moment who's with a psychiatrist, and we're reducing his antipsychotic medication whilst we're doing work with his gut. And I'm just going to go here, because the most interesting thing is he's been steadily on these this medication for his, and I'm not saying this is for everyone, it's just an interesting thing that I've noticed, was he was kind of steady with his medication and how he was experiencing his well-being mentally. And then he had a tooth abscess. So the tooth got infected, so he had antibiotic treatment. Within a week from the antibiotic treatment, he had to like quadruple his quetiapine dose. So he had to increase his dose of quetiapine out of nowhere. So that tells us like no other external factors changed other than taking antibiotics. So he took antibiotics. His experience of anxiety and kind of foggy brain and however he experiences it changed rapidly. So from my perspective, I'm like, okay, I've taken antibiotics that have wiped more of my flora out. We know that the flora produces neurotransmitters which help us feel calm and steady and have normal analytical thought patterns. So we've done like 6 months of work, and now he was taking 6 quetiapine a day, and he's now on 1. So it's like amazing, and I'm really I don't want to like fall out of my scope at all in terms of like I'm always working with psychiatrists when we're doing this and people's GPs, but I think it's important just in general for us to have awareness around that.
Totally. Yeah, no, that is really important for people to know how significant it is, how acute it is, like it's not just this kind of woo-woo thing, like it's very, very evident in people's experience of life. And yeah, antibiotics, I suppose that sort of leads me into thinking about what are the other big things that impact our microbiome. But yeah, obviously antibiotics being one of the big ones. What else, do you think? I mean, obviously we've talked about diet being another one maybe, but sort of
the 3 main things that I kind of group them into for people to understand is food. So the food that we're putting in plays a massive role in terms of how our bacteria thrive. Stress is huge. I could go on about we should do a whole podcast on stress, but stress is massive. And when we are stressed, we release hormones. Those hormones are released, cortisol specifically is a catabolic enzyme, so it breaks down the mucolytic tissue in your gut. And then toxic exposure, so medications, alcohol, environmental toxins, plastics, all of those things massively impact our microbiome. But for me, kind of touching with the sort of mental well-being and stress, if I've got someone in front of me that's experiencing gut dysfunction, or I've got someone sitting in front of me experiencing challenging mental health, I will not do one or the other. You have to do them in silo. Like you've got to support their metabolic system in terms of gut dysfunction and like rebuilding their gut, but you also have to manage their stress, because you could, and I say this to clients, like I can give you all the stuff to heal your gut, get rid of the bad guys, feed the good guys, but if you've got consistent underlying stress, constant cortisol production, you'll get only so far. So it's like really, really important for us to support both aspects of that to help with the healing and rebuilding of that system. So toxic exposure, medications, antibiotics, wipe it out, stress, and foods. 3 most important things, really.
Yeah, I actually I was explaining to a couple of clients, all with kind of finishing gut protocols at about the same time, and I like had the same conversation about 3 or 4 times in 1 week, and I was like, yeah, this is important. I think the reason I'm having this conversation is because it's so important. Is we can do the stool testing, we can do all the work, we can spend all the money on the supplements, we can be eating the right food, but if we don't regulate our nervous system, like not just day to day, but like ongoing, like as all of the random things that hit us through life, like it's just going to possibly revert back to what it was, maybe get worse again, so that I think, even though we're talking about gut health here, it's stress management, regulating our nervous system, that is so vitally important. It's one of the reasons I've kind of ended up pretty much only teaching yin yoga now, is it's just because it's like, we don't, like, people can move their body, they can go for a walk, they can do whatever they want, but like the most important thing that I can help with is people in this room right now is to like relax.
Yeah, I love that. It's also interesting though, because the correlation between low diversity of bacteria, if we go more to the gut, there's a feedback system. So if we've got not enough species, we have a lower chance or ability to produce the relaxing hormones, because if we know bacteria help produce dopamine, GABA, serotonin, so GABA is calming for the nervous system and the brain, dopamine makes us feel good. If we have low diversity of bacteria, our ability to deal with stress, so our stress resilience, is less. So it is sort of that, like, is it the chicken or the egg? And that's why, as we've talked about, it really is something that we should be doing in conjunction with each other, because we want to help support nervous system HPA axis, but also we want to help manage the low diversity. And then if we kind of maybe go slightly into leaky gut, which we can come to, but if we've got leaky gut, we're going to have leaky brain. So our ability to manage stress, deal with stress, cope with stress, if we've got intestinal permeability, is going to affect our brain. So you've got to do that healing work to help someone feel, because you'll have people who are like, I'm doing all the things, like I'm meditating and I'm doing grounding practices and all of those things, but I'm still feeling overwhelmed. Or the other thing I really notice is people who have cravings, sugar cravings. They're craving foods, salty or sweet. Sweet, a lot of it's microbial. So it's not just bad willpower of being like, I'm getting these big cravings at afternoon or mid-morning or whatever. I'm like, it's literally because you've got microbes in your gut that feed off carbohydrates. Like, no matter what you do, your willpower will never take over their hunger. And then the more that we feed them, the more that they are. But if we can get on top of them, change the way that we eat, reduce our carbohydrate load a little bit, but then deal with getting rid of the bad guys and repopulating the good guys, 9 times out of 10 people's cravings just instantly go.
It's so true. It's so much more to it than just being like, I'm not allowed sweet foods and I need to sort of be so disciplined in myself in order to make that happen. And the other thing, I mean, I think that is important for sweet cravings, just while we're talking about it, is the unstable blood sugar sort of added to the
totally
bugs. But yeah, you're right. Your microbiome, your yeasts are craving that sugar more than you are.
One thing I'd just quickly like to touch on before I forget, sorry for sort of segueing out, but in terms of the food that we're eating and how it gets broken down in terms of carbs going to glucose feeds yeast, so that's kind of that yeasty picture. But also I often see people who have maybe been vegetarian for a long period of time or vegan, and they're like, I just can't eat meat. I find it really difficult or heavy to break down. And some people who aren't vegan or vegetarian either, they just find it difficult. If we've been not eating any animal protein, we lose the enzymes and bacteria in our gut lose the bacteria that produce enzymes that break down that protein. So if we then go and give ourselves animal protein, they're like, oh, I can't tolerate it. It makes me have a sore, sluggish gut and I feel yuck. And I'm like, it's never the food. The food isn't the problem. The problem is that your digestive system can't break down the food, which is causing this discomfort in you. So that's why I'm always getting people, if I'm working with someone that is vegetarian or vegan and I want them to increase their protein intake, we may use some supplementation in terms of enzymes and acid to help with the breakdown of foods to start with, put some probiotics in to help with the diversity of those, and then slowly put in meat, but slow cook it so it's like kind of gone through a breakdown process already. And then within a month, totally different. Their ability to process protein is wildly different. And you and I are both on the same bars in terms of protein being one of the most important things for us to be eating, and much more of it, probably more than I eat, definitely, for just, groundingness, stabilization of blood sugars, everything.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I'm so glad you brought up protein because it's just vital. Me and Ted, my partner, had a conversation the other day. He literally had a little tantrum when he realized he was just like calculating. He was like, Peter Attia recommends 40 grams of protein per meal, blah, blah, blah. I'd have to eat 20 eggs or something, blah, blah. You know what I mean? Like he actually just had like this moment, like it's so difficult. And I'm like, yeah, so don't go for 40 grams. Like that's quite a lot, you know, but like 20, 25 plus at least, from a variety of different foods. It doesn't have to be all eggs. But anyway, that was just funny. He just like lost the plot a little bit. So let's jump into stool testing now, because I know it's something you do a lot. I do a lot with my clients as well. I mean, I've had little moments of it and I'm like, do we always need to do it? Like when would you say that it's required? And when is it not? And then we'll dive a little bit into what we can actually see in the stool testing, just so people can get an idea.
Yeah, perfect. It's a really good question in terms of the clinical application as to why. I'm always thinking that, like, why am I doing the stool test? Because it's a lot of money and it's an investment. I think like clinical practice first and foremost is something that helps with the sort of decision making upon that, of being like, okay, I've seen this presentation before, and I will clinically be like, okay, I don't feel like we need to do a stool test, and I know the process of what I'm going to do to help them. But when I've got complicated autoimmune disease clients, or someone that's been dealing with gut problems for a long period of time and they've done repeated stool tests with their GP, then I'm like, because the beauty of doing a stool test is there's no guesswork. It's like, this is what's going on. These are the flora that you have, you don't have. These are the parasites, pathogens, viruses, bacteria that you've got that we don't really want, that are going to be causing disruption. So let's get rid of them. So I think I really like to come into it working with a client of being really open with them, of being like, this is where I feel like you're at, and I think you'd really benefit from doing a stool test so that we can see. And then there might be people that are presenting with less complexities. I'm like, I don't think it's that necessary right now. Let's do 3 months of work. If there's no change from your blood work, how you're feeling, then I'm like, I think it's important for us to go in and do a stool test. But you also don't really want to go 3 months down the track and then be like, why didn't we just do a stool test to start with? So I'm really open with that decision-making process. And like, I will step in clinically and be like, if we're going to do this and you want to get well, like, let's just do a stool test to start with.
Yeah, cool. That makes sense. There's like a little bit of me, you know, that will just put it down on the client a bit, you know, and it's a little bit up to them, depending on the sort of case. Obviously, with the more complex cases, sometimes you need to clarify that it's required. But there are some people out there who don't mind a little bit of trial and error, but the understanding is that there is going to be some trial and error because we don't know for sure, and the only way we can know for sure is to do the test. So
the other thing that I really feel is beneficial is, because I've done this, you know, I'm not a total expert at all, I'm not saying that, but I've done it a lot. I've done a lot of stool testing. I've seen a lot of people. So you can sort of, if I've got Crohn's, colitis, endo, blah, 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 you have rough ideas of what's going on in their gut, to be honest, because you see it all the time. But what I feel is really beneficial from a stool testing perspective is for the client to see what's going on and to understand, of being like, whoa, I've got high steatocrit and I've got no secretory IgA and I've got no beneficial flora and I've got 2 parasites. So it's like, helps them be like, this is why I'm experiencing what I'm experiencing. Because I think for me, the most important thing in terms of helping someone heal is their understanding of what they're experiencing. And if you can help them do that, and the stool test is a really great visual tool to be like, I'm not just throwing supplements at you and telling you to do this because I think I know. I'm like, I know now, because if you've got low secretory IgA, I need to give you immune molecules to help rebuild that. If we don't do that, nothing else is going to work.
Yeah, such a good point. Yeah, that makes sense. And well, it'd be interesting to hear if you agree with me with this, but there's a few people I've just recently, I've been trying to kind of get them on board with the stool test and the money that's required. And I've sort of said that, you know, there's a good chance that the stool test is actually going to be quite useful, like going forward, because if your gut was to retract back to, you know, to things, it's likely it would go back to what it is when you tested it, because those populations of bad guys, or the lack of population of good guys, are more likely to be the ones that happen again, if it was going to happen again, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think,
you know, like if they're going to have blasto, for example,
Yeah.
There is going to be, even when we get on top of the blasto, there's going to be some blasto still living in the system, so that when the opportunity allows itself, i.e. some stress, some period of bad gut or some other factor, that blasto might come back into the system again. Whereas if the blasto was never there in the first place, it's unlikely, for that to happen.
Yeah. Yeah. I think, I agree somewhat with that. Definitely. I think it's that same thing of the environment in our gut and internally and externally is constantly changing. And so it's difficult to sort of see for our head, but I have done a couple of repeat stool tests, which I think is really important to do. And for those that most of the time, most people are like, I'm all good. I'm not going to go and spend more money because I feel good, which I agree with. I'm like, why would you go and spend $600 if you're fine? But I've got a couple of people who are inquisitive and love to learn. And we do a repeat stool test, which is fascinating because you'll see radical changes. Like I've seen someone she's complex or like endo and irritable bowel disease and had really elevated calprotectin and like her whole flora was pooped. And then we repeated the stool test 8 or 9 months later and it was completely different. And I think it was really also, again, same thing. It's empowering for them to be like, well, the work that I've been doing is really, because you can't see it. Like, yes, they can feel it. But I think from a visual perspective, they're like, wow, I had a calprotectin of 850 and now it's 65. Like from an inflammatory response within such a short period of time without taking drugs, that's huge.
Yeah, cool. That's so good to be reminded. I haven't had many clients who have redone their stool test. So it's nice to hear that you can see it in the stool test. You can really see the results. So but now that you've jumped in and mentioned calprotectin, should we have a little, I've just pulled up a stool test here on my computer while we're talking. Shall I share my screen so that you can see it as well, or?
I nearly know off by heart, but share it with me anyway.
And we can have a quick little chat through it. I mean, again, we don't need to go into the
mega.
Yeah, but and to be honest, just FYI, Sarah, not that you'll give anything away here, but this is actually one of my clients' ones. This isn't the sample one, but I think we might put a sample one into the show notes so people can see it if they're interested.
That's a great idea.
Yeah, the podcast show notes, so you can have a look at that, or it'll be on my website as well. So yeah, I mean, obviously, you just jump in and go through it.
Yeah. Okay. So we'll do a rough run through, which is kind of how I work with clients in terms of when I'm explaining it to them. So generally, you're going to do a stool test. First and foremost, the most important thing to remember is the difference between doing this and a stool test that you do through your GP is that when you do them through your GP, it's just a culture of the last part of the bowel where we've pooed. So you do the poo and it gets cultured and we see if there's any growth in that bowel motion that we've done. Whereas the stool testing that we do has PCR testing, which tests pretty much DNA snips of any bacteria, fungi, parasite, pathogen that's in your gut. So it's like gold standard functional stool testing, really. Top of the run.
Awesome.
So that's what's so, like, in my opinion, I'm excited about, because people will be like, my stool test is clear, but I'm still experiencing liquid diarrhea every day. I'm like, well, there has to be something going on in your gut. So yeah, look at the formation of the stool. What color is it? Plays a big impact of whether we've got malabsorption of fats and that sort of stuff. Then we'll look at mucus and blood, which are obviously two big markers for those that have experienced inflammatory bowel disease. They'll experience blood or mucus in their stool, which isn't normal. So if we've got that, we kind of want to know. And then we move into short-chain fatty acids. So these guys are produced from your bacteria. Super important for lots of different things in the body. Generally, I personally don't do really specific work with short-chain fatty acids, because I know that if I'm going to increase the flora in my gut, I'm going to help short-chain fatty acid production. And obviously always vote for people eating butter, because it helps butyric acid, and butyrate is super important.
Yes, butter.
For butter. We love it.
I mean, I suppose with the short chain fatty acids, those are like, that's an indication of your microbiome. We're not actually going to do anything to directly change those, but all the other work you're going to do is going to change those by default, really, isn't it? So
yeah, I mean, some people specifically like to give butyrate, but I'm not. I'm like, nah, I'd rather do the other work. And then we look at functional markers, which is kind of it's not specific in the gut so much, but it's like things that impact the gut. So calprotectin is an inflammatory bowel disease marker. So again, you can get this done through your GP as well. So it's looking at whether we have inflammation of the gut wall ultimately. I kind of like to describe it to people as like how I look at calprotectin if it's elevated is that imagine we had a wound on the outside of us. We wouldn't go and pour like lemon juice and salt onto that wound because it would hurt and sting and be very uncomfortable and probably make it weep and bleed more. Which is exactly the same as calprotectin. If we have elevated calprotectin, it means we've got inflammation of the intestinal wall, and then we go and put foods and alcohol and coffee and drugs into that environment, and it creates this inflammatory response, which is why people, experience mucus and blood in their bowel motions. So very, very helpful indicator for us to look at how the bowel's going in terms of inflammatory, like acute bad inflammation in the gut. Pancreatic elastase is looking at the body's ability, the enzymes, pancreas's ability to produce enzymes. As we sort of loosely mentioned earlier on, enzymes are very, very important from loads of cellular processes in the body. They break down foods, they help with nutrient production, nutrient absorption into the cells. So pancreatic function, interestingly, is it's a really big one that a lot of people have low pancreatic function. And that links into I'm getting reflux, or I'm getting undigested foods in my stool, or I'm chronically constipated. I feel full after food. It's just that heavy digestion. It's like the body can't produce enzymes to break the foods down. So you want to go on and look at that. Secretory IgA, love this guy. It's your first line of immune defense. IgA meaning immunoglobulins. It's like the home of everything. If you've got low secretory IgA, it's not great, and we want to help heal and rebuild the immune molecules in your gut, because I describe it as like the secretory IgA is like a policeman looking at a pathogen parasite, a bad guy coming into your gut. And their job is to sort of suffocate that bad guy and stop him coming in. If you've got low secretory IgA, not enough policemen, the likelihood of having more pathogens, parasites, viruses coming in is much higher. The biggest thing that drives low secretory IgA, stress, cortisol.
Classic.
Zonulin, leaky gut, pretty much is a protein. I won't go into too nitty gritty, but it's a protein enough which controls the loosening and tightening of our gut junctions. So elevated gliadin, which is a protein which comes from gluten, stimulates zonulin production. If we've got elevated zonulin, gluten is out. But to be fair, I pretty much take gluten out most of my clients.
No matter what.
For the period of time while we're doing work, I'm like, if I'm really, because some people are like, I don't want to avoid it forever and get an intolerance to it. I'm like, that firstly is a myth, and B, secondly, if we're doing work and I want to take out an inflammatory protein, which it is, don't eat it because it creates leaky gut. And all of us, every 5 to 7 days we heal it, but some worse for others. Beta-glucuronidase. Kind of links to do with glucuronidation, which is your liver, but also bacteria. So if we've got high levels of the wrong types of bacteria or not enough of the bacteria, we can have low or high beta-glucuronidase. Steatocrit is a fat marker in the stool that's very indicative of what your gallbladder's up to. So again, same people feeling nauseous after eating, struggling with pooing, generally always gallbladder driven. And then the transglutamase IgA is looking at, do I have a true immune response to gluten? Then kind of going into the nitty gritty of it all, I generally sort of kind of miss that first summary because I generally go straight into like what's actually up in terms of parasites and worms. So again, if we have a parasitic load, which is how I describe it to people, is like we can't wrap ourselves in cotton wool and not be exposed to pathogens or parasites or viruses. Like we just don't live in a world like that. We're exposed to flora, microbes every moment of every day. The most important thing, again, which is why it's important talking about the gut and how it works, is like our exposure to these parasites is really our response as to whether we get them, is whether we have enough flora, enough hydrochloric acid, enough enzymes to stop the breakdown of that. So if I've got low secretory IgA, I've got poor pancreatic function, I don't have enough hydrochloric acid in my stomach, and I'm stressed, I'm like a sitting duck for having parasitic or pathogenic load. Whereas if you flip it and you've got a strong diversity of beneficial flora, your pancreas is working properly, you've got enzymes doing their job, your secretory IgA is good, the likelihood is going to be much lower of being like sort of burdened with a parasite or a pathogen.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. The parasites, pathogens are always going to be there. It's just our ability to combat them, or provide a strong barrier in order to prevent them causing issues. So what we're sort of looking at now, just so everyone knows, is essentially like a big list of a whole bunch of parasitic organisms, worms, and then there's all the good guys and all the bad guys, and the test looks at how much or how little of these good guys and bad guys you have. So yeah, I mean, I don't know how many different sort of species are tested, but there's got to be at least like 20, 40, 50 here, from those good bacteria that we've kind of heard of, lactobacillus and things, to some of the bad bacteria like the candidas or the yeast. Sorry, it's not a bacteria. Actual pathogens, viruses.
The biggest thing that I also come to when I'm looking at a stool test for someone is I'll go to their beneficial flora and look at that, and I'll be like, okay, I mean, this, the stool test that we're looking at the moment, they're not all in the totally red zone, but most of them are pretty much flat. The bifidobacterium's good, and her oxalates are good, but it's again this interesting, we'll come to Clostridium, but everything's flat. So her beneficial flora are tired. We can then look and be like, okay, this person's she's got a parasitic load, she's got dysbiotic bacteria. I don't know any of her presentations, but just literally from looking at a test, you'd be like, my first thing is like, okay, we know that there's a parasite, we need to go get rid of him. How do we get rid of him? We feed our beneficial flora. They produce natural antibiotics, like spore biotics specifically. Once you take them and they do their job, they will produce over 50 different forms of antibiotics, purely from a specific strain of probiotic, which is like a bacillus strain. So if you're doing probiotics and then you're also feeding your bacteria with plants, which we talked about earlier, polyphenols, things that are in color, then you're increasing the richness and diversity of those guys, and then they can naturally like, oh, I've got diamoeba in me, I need to kill him off and get rid of him. You're ultimately just reminding your gut how to do its job. It knows what to do. We just become depleted because we live in this is actually a really important fact. We live in a I don't know what the word is, but like no diversity. We don't live with trees and birds and bees and sterile. It's so sterile. We walk around and like everyone's cleaning everything left, right, and center, and it's like, oh, germs. Like germs, literally, that's what keeps us alive. Like we need diversity and richness in there. Like getting out into nature is like the most important thing to be exposed to probiotics. And I'm just going to touch on this because this is huge. Also, our food that we eat is totally devoid of probiotic strains, like spore biotics that sit on your vegetables, that like when your grandma was growing food and there wasn't glyphosate around, maybe it was early days then, but centuries ago we didn't have the toxic sprays that we spray on foods to make production bigger. Those sprays literally kill off any nutrients that are in the food, and they also kill off the bacteria that are on the food. So we should really be able to pick up a tomato off the vine from our garden, eat that for lunch, and there's spores all over that tomato that then inoculate our gut. Whereas we're eating, just nothing. And that's why, in my opinion, we're seeing this like constant rise in autoimmune disease and metabolic diseases and cancers, because we live A, in a stressed environment, B, our food is just sprayed with shit, and when no one's helping rebuild it.
Yeah, such good point around the food. And then I suppose that kind of leads us to think, when we go really wide and really holistic, it's like, well, okay, we need to start growing our own food, and we need to start making our own compost. Like, the sort of scope gets bigger and bigger. But there are still lots and lots of steps you can take prior to doing that, because that does sound a bit overwhelming to people, of course.
Yeah.
But starting with food grown locally, whether you've got any little market gardens in the area. I mean, for Raglan and Hamilton based people, I know a bunch of them. I might even put them in the show notes, or you can send me a message if you want to hear them, because I've sort of started getting veggie boxes and things delivered to top up what we're growing in the garden. And there's some incredible people out there doing stuff, and we need to support our farmers, especially the ones who are doing it organic.
And I just want to touch on this because I guess my role is to we're going to modify and increase diversity and change the microbiome to get on top of the parasitic pathogenic yeast load. And we do that through plants. So we would use a concentrated plant tannin. So I would use, maybe a tincture with different herbs in it that help feed the bacteria. So that's a quick way, 3 months of increasing, a strong tincture dose into someone to help rebuild and feed the bacteria. Also with using in conjunction with that, you'd be doing probiotic therapy as well. So there's quick, easier emphasis on the easier ways to do it. But I think that's where the growing your own food and as much as possible, or buying organic as much as possible, but even just going out into nature and like being amongst different environments is also important. You kind of want to do them first and foremost. But if I've got someone sitting in front of me and they've got Crohn's disease, and food is hugely important, but I'm also definitely going to go in and just do like hard and fast work of being like, cool, let's get rid of these guys.
100%. Yeah, I mean, it's incredible the kind of access to the high quality supplements and tinctures and herbs that we can get, because it does make certainly for somebody who's really struggling with some serious chronic issues, it makes I suppose the remedy of those issues much quicker, which is amazing.
But then on the sort of devil's advocate, I also really don't want to play like this green pharmacy game where you're just like throwing stuff at someone when it's that same thing, their environment that they're in, or that they're not changing that. I'm like, you have to change what you're doing, because you didn't develop this disease willy-nilly overnight. This disease came because of multiple different factors, like huge things that too big to discuss now, but it's that same thing of working in synergy with all the aspects of their life. Like, it's not just like you sit and do a stool test and voila, it's done. It's like, it's complex, and it's a lot of commitment for the person that's showing up the other side, because they're making huge changes.
Yeah, it's in tandem. It's the strong herbs and things for the acute, the now, but it's also the lifestyle, the diet changes that are going to support them, and those are going to be the things that support them longer term. Anything else you want to mention here around the stool test while we're specifically talking about stool test results?
I
what
guess
else we can see?
I'll touch on. Oh yeah, we looked at commensals and phylum. Yeah. I guess looking at just a really interesting thing, and I love this, is that often maybe we won't see fungi, candida, in the stool. So we'll do a stool test, but someone may present with that. So someone, let's say, eczema is a classic example. If you've got eczema, you're going to have yeast. And so you might do a stool test and be like, oh, but I don't have yeast in my stool. But what happens is because there's other bacteria in the gut, let's say there's a parasite sitting in there as well, the yeast will be like, this home's like not enough food source for me, so I'm going to go and live elsewhere. So they move into the bloodstream and tend to live more by the liver, where there's high glycogen stores, sugar stores. So they munch off sugar because that's what candida love to feed off. And then your stool test will show us if I've got high Clostridium, which is a beneficial flora, but you don't want to have high levels of that, then that's indicative of having a yeast overgrowth. And then also we look at these two, there's a kind of, I explain them as the king and queen of the gut, Bacteroidetes and Firmicutes. You don't want to have too many of either or, but if you've got elevated Firmicutes, they tend to be more, again, a sugar-feeding bacteria. So if we've got higher levels of the Firmicutes bacteria, then people, again, same thing, they'll be like, I've got brain fog, I crave sweet things, and then you'll look at their stool test, high Firmicutes, high Clostridium, and I'm like, that's a perfect example of someone who's got yeast, which causes brain fog and sugar cravings. So I would look at being like, okay, I'm going to need to firstly and foremost get rid of the parasite because he's taking the home, which is like annoying the yeast. So he lives elsewhere. You want to get rid of him, and then you do yeast cleansing after that. But yeast and gnarly, they take a long time to get rid of. But you can do it. It's just a process. So yeah, I think the families, it's just looking at the diversity and richness. Like that's ultimately in variety of what we're looking at is like creating your environment and your gut to be strong, resilient, and lots of bacteria. And how you do that is not be stressed and eat good food.
So simple.
So simple.
Cool. Awesome. Yeah. Such a valuable test for for the type of person who is having some serious health issues. I thought we might just leave people with a few recommendations, maybe things that they could try prior to doing a stool test if they haven't tried these already, like and I suppose that would be, what are the, most important things for gut health. And this is for somebody who's specifically, dealing with digestive issues or some of the other issues we've talked about that are related to gut health around autoimmunity or mood and mental health issues.
One thing that I would say is that not trying to plug what we do, and I mean I obviously think our job is like amazing and important to help people because I've worked with a lot of people who have tried to do a lot of it by themselves. There's so much research out there. There's so much contradictory information around, SIBO and this and that and FODMAP and like doing all these things, and it can feel overwhelming for people, I think, of being like, what do I do? Do I eat probiotic foods? Oh, but if I eat that, it makes me bloated. If I don't do this, it makes me that. And I personally just think the time and effort is just like go and see someone who knows what's up with the gut. And within, I've got multiple examples of people who've dealt with years. I'm talking like 10 years of chronic diarrhea every single day. Within a month, it's totally gone. Because practitioners know specific strains of probiotics. Like, yes, probiotics are very good. Yes, prebiotics are very good. But if you go in and get a random one off the shelf and you don't really know what you're taking, it's multi-strained. It could, most times with people, it causes them more discomfort, or they'll take it and be like, probiotics don't work. Which is like, yeah, they don't work if you're taking the wrong ones. And like the same thing with constipation. If you give a specific strain of probiotic, and maybe if their gallbladder's not working, within like 2 weeks, I'm like, within 2 weeks, I want to be making that person be like, whoa, I've already noticed a difference. And so I think that's where working with someone who it's their job to know what's up, like it's so much more helpful. It saves you so much time and money spending energy on trying random different things. But if we want to take it to like that kind of more top level, easy thing,
and I suppose
it's
probably some of the things you've already mentioned, like we've talked a lot about stress management, being something that, and to be honest, I mean,
huge.
We'll need to work on stress management for the rest of our life. It's never going to be something you're going to work on, boom, done, moving on. Like stress management will constantly be something that we need to manage and work through. But yeah, stress management, diversity of food, polyphenols,
chewing your food,
chewing,
And I think where we sit is that people, from that high level probably think that they do those things and they're like, but I'm still experiencing this. And I'm like, if you've got gallbladder dysfunction, if you've got a microbiome that's not doing its job properly, it's just so much easier to like get those things working and do the work for 3 to 6 months, and then you won't have to do it again. So yeah, I think all those higher level things we've discussed are very, very important. But also if you kind of feel like you've done that and you're like, I'm actually still really struggling, then working with someone to just help move through that, because often it's complex internally, and so you just got to like tweak things and get things moving and grooving, and then you're good.
Yeah, cool. No, that's good. Good answer. I mean, I think whether people listening have already done all the things that we recommended, which kind of implies they might be ready for testing, or if they haven't, then just trying those things first. Like there's plenty of places to start there. So I think that's great. Cool. Okay. Well, yeah, that's kind of quite a lot for people to take in and digest, I feel. So it's and I know both of us are kind of open to questions, whether you want to fire those through Instagram or through our websites, through our sort of contact pages and things. So yeah, definitely if there's anything that's piqued your interest or you want to hear more about, just send us a message. But yeah, any last little notes from you, Ceci? Not to put you on the spot.
No, I love that. No, I think honestly the most important thing is just to take it easy, do breath work, eat good food, surround yourself with good people. I mean, they are like such sort of simple, basic things, but I just don't think we do them enough. And we live in a very complex world now, so we're seeing complex disease. So a lot of it is just going back to the basics.
Cool. Yeah, awesome. Thanks for finishing there. Alrighty. Thanks, team. Thanks, Sarah. Talk to you all soon.
Ciao.